Let's talk about the concept of tokenization. Everyone talks about it, and there are many interventions about it on YouTube. It should be said, however, that perhaps this concept is not so clear for an entrepreneur to understand. We will therefore try to help them learn a new language, both from a financial and technological point of view, but also from a legal point of view. This new financial language starts from a situation that today makes us understand how, from a practical point of view, an entrepreneur has great difficulty in finding the opportunity of someone who believes in this project. Previously, this work was the responsibility of banks or institutional lenders, but at this time of great economic crisis, it will probably be increasingly difficult. On the other hand, those who have always intended to save and invest their savings in a context in which the element of trust was crucial now have the impression that the trust has been betrayed. Consider we are an economic system that cyclically, and we can affirm it because history teaches us, represents losses of 30 to 40% in a single moment, in a single day, which certainly generates a loss of a concept of trust on the part of the average investor and saver. This is because the original idea that linked to the one who wants to have a return on his capital and the one who asks him to entrust it to him had to be an active participation relationship, whereas now this relationship has gradually waned. In fact, in 99.9% of cases with situations in which it is not known what the path of the money that the investor entrusts to the investment fund recommended by the bank is. For example, there are very stringent regulations that oblige investment funds to invest money according to the paradigms and criteria of their corporate purpose. And there are also controls. Pity that it is not said that investment funds can invest in other funds, and therefore the latter, i.e. those in which the former have invested, do not necessarily have to explain what is the destination of their investments and what is the percentage of risk. So the saver who today wants to believe in a project, wants to imagine participating in something that he could be a part of, is not really part of it. What we need to think about is an inversion of a trend, that is an epochal change. We have moved to an economy in which the physicality of the relationship between the investor and the person proposing the investment is melting. The regulatory elements of a legal relationship are stipulated in a new environment, the ether, an environment where the concept of a virtual contract, an ethereal contract, is born. And therefore, since the operational area of the proposal is an aterritorial area, in a new dimension which is the ether, so even the subjects that move the financial interests in the virtual world may not be the same as in the real one. This is where we introduce the concept of digital identity, the ownership of an instrument, both financial and legal, which animates the web, is not linked to the natural person, but to his account, his digital profile. So in a world where 191 billion and 800 million emails are sent in a single day, in a world that is in which information between subjects is exchanged in this quantity, which is virtual and not paper, in a world where a platform like Google exists, which has 5 billion and 200 million searches a day, a world of information flows that underlie data that are exchanged and information that is regulated in this flow. Try to imagine how the virtual reality is absolutely predominant in terms of energy mass and quality compared to the physical world. Virtual banks will be born. Virtual contracts will be born. Methods of virtual participation in the project will be born. And therefore, information interpreters will be eliminated. Try to imagine if I told you that every time each of you clicks on Google in search of information, there was someone between you and Google who receives the message and then transmits it, and then Google transmits it back to the interpreter, and the interpreter transmitted it back to you. No one would use it anymore, because what matters is the direction, immediacy, and speed of a relationship between the manifestation of will and what our manifestation has brought us. We must therefore understand that first of all, we must set in our company and in our minds as entrepreneurs the idea that the data we work on must be true to be transmitted in a true way. And in doing so, we will combine a search for truth and transparency by those who want to believe in a project to a real proposal. We all know that banks' balance sheets may not be reliable. Had they been the banks that have made billions of savers cry to this day, probably would never have gone to that point. We all know that the value of a share in a listed company is not real, or rather it is not attributable to the real value of the company. It is therefore necessary to face two phases. The first is to put our company, our product, our project in blockchain. Once we've gone through analysis through which our project or our company can enter a set of data in a register and decode them in a certain, unalterable and self-referencing way, then we can move on to the second phase and talk about tokenization. Technically, a token is the digital representation of a value, but it is nothing more than a computer tool for reading a data. The skill from a financial and legal point of view lies in translating this entity into a value. The secret is to anchor this value to a value that is released by the blockchain. What does it mean? It means that when we're able to transmit to this extraordinary technology a set of data that are automatically generated without human intervention, we will have the possibility of inserting irrefutable data into the lie detector, which are translated into a value. In another video, I will explain that depending on the type of object we're going to tokenize, we will have a different tokenization methodology. There is a different translation of the value and a different subdivision of the same. To get to this, we need to understand what the types of tokens are. I summarize an important concept for those who do business or for those who want to invest in a company that issues tokens. Beyond the declination of tokens, beyond the fact that many technicians have indulged themselves in the web world to explain that there are different methods of classifications and different tokens depending on their function. What matters for those who buy a token and for those who want to issue it as a representation of the value in reality is what underlies the denomination of that token. That is the contract that governs the relationship between those who believe in the project and, on the other hand, he who issues the membership proposal. Observing the differences between the various approaches in token analysis, we can say that there are methods of describing tokens that are empirical. For example, some people argue that a token can be related as a concept to a casino chip or to a shopping voucher, because within a predefined circuit it is possible to predefine a spendability value in the context of an agreement between subjects adhering to this ecosystem. These are tokens that entitle you to get something in return. Then, there are other types of tokens that allow instead to possess the digital representation of the ownership of a company value, or to obtain a service of a contractual nature. These are tokens that allow you to exercise a right to vote. The denomination of a token is very conditioned and determined by two elements. The structural element of an IT nature, therefore the type of information that underlies this tool. So to give you a definition, there may be ERC20s on the Ethereum platform. There are the NFTs, which are tokens that identify in an absolutely unique way a certain asset of which they are the representation. Then there are the analyses from the legal point of view or from the legal point of view of function. Necotra, the most authoritative in Italy for blockchain law, defined the difference between the various tokens from the counterpart's point of view. In his text, Law of the Blockchain, he explained that there are classes to differentiate tokens. Class 1 tokens that do not confer rights other than those of being transferred to the reference blockchain. For example, a coin, a method of transfer of wealth. Class 2 tokens include rights to exercise the right to performance against the issuer or third parties upon the fulfillment of a certain condition, again to a smart contract. And among these we have payment tokens or future payment tokens. Class 3 tokens are mixed class. They represent the property but also confer ownership-related voting rights. Then there are classifications of a regulatory nature, introduced by the SEC, which admitted the need to create a prevalence of substance over form. That is, whenever tokens represent an investment of money in a company with a reasonable expectations of profits resulting from the entrepreneurial efforts of the proposing company, they must be subject to the approval of this controlling body. Whenever there is an expectation of an increase in a payment made for the purchase of a token, we are faced with a financial instrument and therefore the issuer must be authorized. Then we have FINMA, the Swiss Federal Financial Supervisory Authority, which is considered very authoritative by many jurists and also by all those who, on a financial level, animate the panorama of the issuance of this instrument. FINMA says that there are three forms of tokens. The payment tokens, which are comparable to simple cryptocurrencies and are not linked to other functions. Then we have the utility tokens, which allow the presentation of a token to receive a certain performance or utility, but are not a participation in a project of an economic nature in the form of an interest dividend. Then we have the investment tokens that represent assets, such as shares of real values, companies, revenues, or dividends or interest on a given transaction. Basically, however, from a macro structural point of view, there are two types of large categories. Utility tokens, which are IT structures that allow the holder to receive something in exchange that he cannot receive except by presenting this type of telematic product, and security tokens that instead are the digital representation of a value that can also be exchanged or sold or transmitted to third parties in exchange for money. The value of this token is a digital representation of an original value, but it could also be susceptible to a change in the law of supply and demand. Thank you for listening, and see you at the next study.